He didn't even hesitate. One swing and I hit the floor. Right there, between the birthday cake and the guests. People froze. No one said a word. Why did he do it? What kind of son strikes his mother during a party? And why? Why did I stay silent for so long? This isn't a story about anger. It's about what happens after. When the music stops, when the people leave, and when the truth finally speaks out loud. If you want to know what really happened, I'll stay with me until the end. Before diving into this shocking mystery, God will bless you if you write Amen in the comments, and if you love thrilling, breathtaking stories. Don't forget to subscribe. I wake up before the sun rises. I always do. Even now, at 72 years old, my body knows the rhythm of work better than the rhythm of rest. My bones ache before my eyes open, and the familiar pull in my lower back greets me like an old enemy. I swing my legs slowly over the edge of the mattress, careful not to make the springs creak too loud. Hector hates it when the house stirs before him. The room I sleep in, no, live in, is at the far end of the house, where the mold creeps along the corners of the ceiling, and the air feels like it's forgotten how to move. The little window near the top of the wall lets in a sliver of light, just enough to cast long shadows on the cracked floor tiles. It used to be a storage room. Now it's mine. They cleared out some boxes, threw in a twin bed with a mattress so thin you could feel the wooden slats beneath, and said, "You'll be fine here, Mama." Like I was a stray cat, they decided to keep in the garage. But I wasn't always here. This house, this very house, was mine once. Mine and Robert's. God rest his soul. We saved every penny for it. I washed clothes for 3 families in the neighborhood, took in sewing at night until my fingers bled. And Robert worked double shifts at the plant until the day his heart just gave out on a Tuesday morning. I signed the mortgage papers in my name. I remember the feel of that pen in my hand. The joy, the fear, the pride. This house was supposed to be our family's safety, a foundation built on sweat and love. But love is a fragile currency when others forget its value. After Robert passed, I moved in with Hector and Patty, thinking I would help raise the children, cook meals, fill the house with warmth and old recipes. It started with small things: making breakfast, folding laundry, sweeping the porch. But somewhere along the way, the helping turned into obligation. Then obligation turned into expectation. Then expectation turned into silence. I became a ghost in my own home. No one told me what to do. Exactly. No one needed to. It was in the looks, the size, and the way Patty avoided eye contact, and Hector's voice boomed louder every month. Every misstep felt like a trespass. Every kindness I offered was taken as owed. There's a kind of loneliness that settles deep into your bones when you're surrounded by people and still feel unseen. It eats at you slowly, hollowing out your voice, your will. I've your name. They call me Mama still. Sometimes, but not with love, with impatience, with that sharp edge that says, "You're in the way. You're a burden." Hector's words echo even now, in the quiet of the morning. "You're lucky we even let you stay here. Don't touch that. Don't meddle. Don't speak unless I ask. Why do you have to make everything about you? Mama, the worst one, you're not the mother I want." That one stuck, like a splinter you can't pull out. Said in a moment of anger years ago, but it never left me. That sentence tattooed itself on my heart, and no matter how many meals I cook, or shirts iren, or tears I hide in the bathroom sink, I can't wash it off. Miguel, my youngest grandson, is the only one who still sees me, really sees me. He comes into the kitchen sometimes, tugging at my apron, asking for stories. He likes the way I make rice, the soft kind, with just the right amount of salt and garlic. I live for those moments. I stay for him, because if there's still one person in this house who looks at me like I matter, then I still have a reason to stay upright, to keep moving, to keep breathing. But sometimes, in the dark of night, I wonder if staying was a mistake, if I should have taken my little pension and gone somewhere else, rented a tiny place with a garden. Maybe. Somewhere the light isn't so dim, and my footsteps don't feel like a crime. Yet here I am, in the back room, in the house I once bought, in the life I never imagined. But something's changing. I don't know how to explain it yet, just a stirring, like a storm rising far away that I can't see. But I feel it low and deep and growing. Something's about to break. And for the first time in years, I don't feel afraid. Some mornings, I ask myself if I still exist, not in the dramatic sense, not like someone pondering their mortality or spiritual worth. No, I mean in the literal way. Do I exist in this house? Because there are days long, heavy days where no one speaks to me. Not one word. Not Patty, who used to at least smile politely when I handed her folded laundry. Not Hector, who only talks to me when something is missing or wrong or out of place. Not even the kids, except for Miguel. And even he seems quieter these days. Confused, maybe. Hesitant. This house breathes, but it does not speak to me anymore. It only gives me tasks. I wake up, and I scrub. I sweep. I stir pots. I fold towels. I iron shirts. I pick up shoes and socks and snack wrappers that no one notices until they're not where they should be. I do these things because not doing them feels worse. It gives them an excuse to lash out, and I no longer have the strength for confrontations. But lately, even my silence seems to offend them. Last week, I was rinsing beans in the sink, those small red ones that Miguel likes, and I must have made a sound. A small sound, a humming, maybe a whisper of a tune my mother used to sing when I was little. It wasn't loud. It wasn't deliberate. But Hector stormed into the kitchen like I'd set something on fire. Could you keep it down? For God's sake. You sound like a dying cat. I froze. The colander trembled in my hand. The beans clattered like pebbles against the metal sink. He stood there, arms crossed, eyes narrowing, as if daring me to respond. I didn't. I just nodded. Like always? And stop cooking so early. The smell clings to everything. I wanted to say something. I wanted to ask how he could say that when I'd been making breakfast for that house since before he could hold a spoon. But my mouth refused to open. The words dissolved in my throat, choked by fear and years of practiced silence. After he left, Patty walked in, her eyes skimming over me like I was part of the furniture. I tried to smile. I don't know why I still do that. She didn't smile back. That's the thing with Patty. She doesn't hurt me with her words. Not like Hector does. She wounds me with her absence. With her unwillingness to see me, I think deep down, she knows what's happening is wrong. I've seen it in her eyes. That flicker of shame when Hector shouts. The way her shoulders hunch. Like she's the one being scolded. But she never says a word. I suppose we all survive the way we know how. Sometimes I wonder if that's all I've ever done. Survive. This morning, while I was making lunch, chicken soup, the kind that smells like home, I heard them whispering in the living room. I don't usually eavesdrop. I respect space, even when mine isn't respected. But the walls in this house are paper thin, and my hearing, despite my age, is still sharp. She's in the way, Hector said. We could use that room for the kids. Miguel needs his own space. It's her house, Patty murmured. She doesn't even know that. She doesn't remember anything. She thinks this is still the 82nd. She's delusional. That word stuck to me. Delusional. Like a stain I couldn't scrub out. I turned off the stove and walked quietly back to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed, my knees pressed together, my hands folded in my lap, and I waited for the heat in my chest to pass. But it didn't. It burned, like it had been waiting all this time for permission to rise. They want me gone. Not just ignored, not just silent, gone. And the cruelest part, they'll paint themselves as the victims. They'll tell neighbors and friends that I'm difficult, forgetful, maybe even senile, that they tried their best, that I didn't appreciate them. Hector will smile. That fake politician smile. He's mastered charming, successful, so loving to his family, and people will believe him. Because who believes the old woman in the back room? Later that afternoon, Miguel wandered into the kitchen. He was holding one of his toy cars, the blue one with the chipped paint. He didn't say anything, just climbed onto the step stool by the counter and sat, watching me. I kept peeling potatoes. After a few minutes, he said, "Grandma, is this your house?" My hands paused. I looked at him. His big brown eyes looked so much like Hector's when he was that age. back when he'd sit in that same spot, swinging his legs, asking for stories and biscuits. I smiled. Not the kind I give his parents. The real kind. Yes, baby, I whispered. This was my house. It still is, in a way. He nodded like he understood. Then he picked up a potato and handed it to me. And just like that, my heart cracked open. Just a little, just enough to let the light in. It was a Sunday. In our house, Sundays used to mean pancakes, gospel music, and long naps after lunch. Now, they mean barbecues. Not the kind with laughter and shared stories, but the ones where Hector turns our backyard into a theater of appearances. He invites people from work, loud men with pressed polo shirts and fake smiles, women with too much perfume and conversations that start with, "You won't believe what we just bought," and children who run wild while their parents sip beer and pretend they're not exhausted by the performance. That day, the grill was fired up before noon. Patty was wiping down the plastic tables in the yard. The kids were filling up water balloons. Hector paced the patio barking orders like a general. And I was in the kitchen. As always, no one told me to cook. No one ever does. But the unspoken rule is clear. Mama cooks. Mama stays in the back. Mama doesn't sit at the table. So I made my rice, my special recipe, the one Miguel loves most. Long grain, toasted first in oil, then simmered in broth with garlic, onions, and a pinch of cumin. It's the dish I used to make when Hector was small and scraped his knees, or when Robert came home with sore muscles and a tired smile. I cooked it slowly, with love, maybe with a little defiance too. As I scooped the rice into a deep blue ceramic bowl, I heard the laughter outside grow louder, the kind of laughter that fills a space not with joy, but with noise meant to cover everything else. I placed the bowl on a tray, added a spoon and a folded napkin, and picked it up with both hands. My knees protested, but I steadied myself. I was taking this to Miguel, just to him. I stepped into the yard. The sun was high and cruel. It made the patio tiles burn under my feet and cast long shadows behind every chair. The smoke from the grill curled into the air, mixing with the tang of barbecue sauce and beer. No one noticed me. Not the guests. Not Patty. Not even Hector, who stood by the grill, talking about some deal he'd closed last week. I moved carefully between chairs and people, my eyes fixed on Miguel. He sat at the edge of the yard, fiddling with a plastic dinosaur, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. The boy had my heart wrapped around his tiny fingers. I was halfway there when I felt it. A presence, a shift in the air. Then his voice. "What the hell is that?" I stopped. Everyone did. Hector's voice had that effect. It cut through sound like a blade. I turned slowly, the tray still balanced in my hands. He stood a few steps behind me, beer in hand, eyebrows raised in mockery. "Mother, what do you think you're doing?" I opened my mouth, unsure whether to speak or just nod. "I told you," he barked. "No food unless I say, that's not for you to decide." A chuckle rippled through the crowd, nervous, uncomfortable. Miguel looked up. I didn't move. "Give me that," Hector growled. He stepped forward and grabbed at the bowl. Too fast, too rough. The tray jerked. The bowl slipped, and everything spilled. The rice fell in a perfect arc. 1,000 grains of effort, of memory, made of love, scattered across the patio like confetti made of shame. The bowl hit the ground and shattered with a sharp crack that silenced the yard. Then came the push. It wasn't hard, not like a punch, but it was enough. Enough to make me stumble, enough for my knees, brittle with age and fatigue, to give way. I fell. My body met the tile with a thud that reverberated through my bones. My palms scraped the ground. My skirt crumpled beneath me. The sun beat down on my shoulders like judgment. For a moment, no one moved. And then, "This is my house," Hector roared. "You don't get to play the victim here. I've done enough for you." I looked up. His face was red, veins pulsing at his temples. My eyes found Miguel. He was frozen, still holding the dinosaur, his mouth slightly open, confused, afraid. The other children had gone quiet. The adults looked anywhere but at me. All except one, Doña Rosa. She stood near the back gate, holding a plate of homemade cookies in one hand and her phone in the other. Recording. She met my gaze, and in her eyes, I saw it. Not pity, not shock, but fire, a righteous flame. She nodded, almost imperceptibly. I looked back down at the rice. It clung to my dress, to the cracks in the tile, to the soles of Hector's shoes, and something inside me shifted. Something old. Something I'd buried so deep beneath years of silence and sorrow. I'd forgotten it was still alive. Pride, not the kind that makes you boast. The kind that keeps you upright when the world pushes you down. I didn't cry. Not then. Not in front of them. I gathered the broken pieces of the bowl with shaking hands. I brushed the rice aside. I stood. Slowly. My joints screamed. But I stood. I walked back into the kitchen, past the guests who wouldn't meet my eyes. And behind me, I heard Rosa's voice. Soft. Firm. Some things shouldn't stay hidden. She said it to no one in particular. But everyone heard. The next morning was unusually quiet. No yelling. No slamming of cabinet doors. No sarcastic remarks over coffee. Just silence. That strange, dense kind of silence that fills a house after something breaks. Not a plate or a chair, but something deeper. Something between people. I woke up before the sun again. My back still ached from the fall. The bruises on my knees had turned a sickly purple. But I didn't wince. I didn't see. I sat on the edge of my bed and listened. Birdsong in the distance. A lawnmower, somewhere far off. And under all that, the faint creak of someone walking past my door carefully, afraid to disturb me. Perhaps, no, that would be too generous. Afraid of something else. I rose and made my way to the kitchen. Miguel's dinosaur lay forgotten on the counter. The rice stain on the patio tiles had been washed away, scrubbed into nothingness. But I could still see it, the arc of spilled food. The broken bowl. Hector's hand shoving me. I touched the corner of the countertop, grounding myself. That was yesterday. Today was different. I didn't know how yet, but I felt it. Then the phone rang. Not the house phone. My old cell phone, the one I kept hidden in my nightstand drawer. Miguel had helped me learn how to use it a year ago, teaching me how to text and send voice notes. I used it mostly to play music when I couldn't sleep. The screen flashed. Rosa G. I answered with a whisper. Hello. Her voice was firm, energized. Amelia, you might want to sit down. I didn't sit. I stood there, barefoot on the cold tile, listening. She told me the video had been posted to a local community group, Willow Falls Neighbors United. Someone had asked, is this really how we treat our elders? It had been shared over 300 times overnight. Comment after comment poured in, some in disbelief, others in outrage. People recognized Hector, recognized me, and they weren't silent. That poor woman. Isn't she the one who helped run the church kitchen back in the day? How can her own son? I didn't know whether to be afraid or grateful. Both. Maybe. Then Rosa said something that changed everything. There's a woman who wants to help you. A Lavier. She saw the video. A pause? Her name's Elena. She works with a legal aid group in Springfield. I know her sister. She's different. She's young, but smart. And she's angry in a good way. I didn't answer right away. Laviers. Courts. Trouble. It sounded like war. But then I remembered Miguel's eyes. The way he looked at me when I was on the ground. Not just shocked. Hurt. As if something he believed about the world had cracked. That was war too. Tell her to come, I said. By afternoon, the house buzzed with a strange tension. Patty kept looking at her phone, biting her lip. Hector left for work without a word, slamming the front door. Miguel was at school. I stayed in my room until I heard the doorbell. Rosa walked in first, like a shield. Behind her was a woman no more than 30, hair in a tight bun, glasses, a satchel slung over one shoulder like armor. Mrs. Walsh, she said, stepping forward. I'm Elena Rios. Her voice was steady, respectful. I nodded. She glanced at the living room. Can we talk somewhere private? I led her to the back patio, the scene of the crime. It smelled like chlorine and burned charcoal. We sat on opposite ends of the bench. She pulled out a notebook. Let me be clear, she began. What happened to you is unacceptable. And it's not just a family matter. It's legal. He blinked. You mean, I can sue my own son? She looked me in the eye. You can protect yourself. This house, I ran a search. It's still in your name. You're the legal owner. He never transferred the deed. That surprised me. I had signed so many papers over the years. I assumed I'd given it away without knowing. You have rights. Mrs. Walsh. He can't evict you. He can't control you. And with that video, you have witnesses. You have power. I exhaled. Long. Slow. The kind of breath that hadn't left my chest in years. But if I fight him, I whispered, I lose him forever. Elena softened. Maybe. But ask yourself, did you ever really have him? That stung. Because it was true. Robert's son was gone. The boy who used to climb into my lap after nightmares had become a man who used my silence as a leash. Elena didn't push. She let me sit with that truth. Then she said, we can start small. File a protection order. Quietly. If he retaliates, we escalate. But we take it step by step. I'll guide you. Why? I asked. She paused, then reached into her bag and pulled out a photograph. A woman older, in a hospital gown, bruises on her arms. My grandmother, Elena said. No one believed her until it was too late. I swore I'd never let another woman go unheard again. I closed my eyes, and I nodded. That night, I watched the stars for the first time in years. I wrapped myself in Robert's old coat, sat on the porch with a cup of chamomile tea, and let the night wind tangle my hair. Inside, I heard Hector's footsteps, his voice, distant and irritated, Patty whispering in worried tones. But out here, I was free. For now, just a whisper of freedom. But it was enough, because I knew this time I wouldn't fall alone. The papers arrived on a Thursday, slipped under the front door in a large white envelope stamped with bold black letters. Notice of temporary protective order. Hector wasn't home yet when it came. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. The air in the house was already thick with the knowing. Patty saw it first when she returned from the store. She picked it up like it might burn her fingers, turning it over without opening it, her face drained of color. Then she placed it neatly on the entryway table and went upstairs without a word. That was how it began, the unraveling. Later that evening, when Hector came home, his tie loosened, phone in one hand, keys in the other, the house held its breath. He saw the envelope, stopped mid-step. Patty, he called. No answer. He picked it up. Read the words. And then he didn't shout. He laughed. A cold, sharp sound that echoed off the tile floors and into the corners of the kitchen, where I stood, washing a single teacup. He walked toward me. Slow, calculated. So, he said, his voice low, this is how you thank me. I didn't respond. I dried the cup, set it gently on the rack. You let that little activist lawyer feed you garbage. You let Rosa film some stupid moment, and now you're playing the victim. I turned to face him. Not defiant, not afraid, just steady. I'm not playing anything, I said. His jaw clenched. You think a judge is going to take your side? After everything I've done for you. I wanted to laugh, but I didn't. Instead, I said the simplest, most dangerous thing I could have chosen. It's still my house. That broke something, not in me. In him? He stepped closer. Too close. I could smell his aftershave, bitter and sharp. His eyes flared with something between rage and disbelief. You want to make this a fight? Mama, you really think people are going to believe you over me? I've got friends, clients, reputation. I stared up at him. You had a mother? Once. You don't anymore. That did it. He turned and slammed the hallway door so hard the mirror rattled on the wall. The next day, he started his campaign. First came the whispers calls to neighbors, co-workers, church friends. She's confused. She's not well. We're doing everything we can. Then came the performance. He made a show of being the dutiful son, helped carry groceries for Patty, kissed Miguel's forehead in public, brought me tea once, and made sure Rosa saw it from across the fence. But it was too late. The video had legs. A local news station picked it up. Elder abuse in Willow Falls. The headline teased, my face, blurred, but still familiar, appeared behind news anchors who used words like disturbing and shocking. People I hadn't seen in years stopped me in the grocery store. Amelia. We had no idea. I always thought Hector was different. Rosa never left my side. She walked with me to the post office, sat beside me in church, held my hand when I spoke to the legal aid rep about my rights as a homeowner. And Elena, she was a whirlwind, efficient, calm, sharp as a blade. He's going to play the PR game, she told me. That's what men like him do when the image cracks. And what do? I asked. You don't crack. But there were moments, like the night I found my room ransacked, drawers open, clothes tossed, my keepsakes on the floor. No money was taken. Nothing of real value gone. Just my sense of peace. I knew it was him. A warning. The next morning, I packed up what mattered: my photos, Robert's watch, my pension documents, and gave them to Rosa for safekeeping. Then I changed the lock on my bedroom door. Let him knock. Let him wonder. 1 week later, Elena filed the petition to reinstate full ownership rights. Her legal team had unearthed old documents, Hector's signature, on a clause years ago, acknowledging the house as a gifted temporary residence. It was enough to start. Hector hired a lawyer. Slick, expensive. They tried intimidation first, then delay tactics, then media leaks. But none of it worked like he thought it would, because people were watching now. And more importantly so, was Miguel. He came to me one afternoon, holding a drawing. It was of our house, but different. In the picture, I stood at the front porch. Hector was in the background, small and gray. And above me, a sun with a big smile. This is for you, Grandma, he said. Because you make the house happy. I couldn't speak. I just pulled him close and held him for a long, long time. That night, I taped the drawing to my bedroom wall, right next to the protective order. The house is still divided, quiet, full of eyes. But I've stopped tiptoeing. I make my rice in the morning again. I hum when I stir the pot. I open the windows wide and let the air move through the rooms like a cleansing breeze. He can pace. He can shout into his phone. He can throw glances like daggers. But I am not afraid, because something has changed. Not just in the courts or on the internet, but inside me. For the first time in years, I am not surviving. I am standing, and I will not be moved. The courthouse in Springfield sat like a brick giant, stoic and cold under a gray sky. I hadn't been in a courtroom since Robert fought the insurance company over a workplace injury, back when Hector still wore braces and thought his mother could fix anything with a bowl of warm soup. Now, he sat across from me, clean-shaven, in a tailored suit, lips pressed in that tight line he wore when he didn't get his way. He didn't look at me. That was fine. I wasn't looking at him either. I was looking at the judge, a woman in her 60s with hair like snow and eyes like iron. Her name was Judge Thompson, and from the moment she spoke, I knew she'd seen things, heard lies, buried truths. I hoped she'd say mine. Elena sat beside me, calm and steady, flipping through folders. Her fingers moved fast, her voice low and focused. I clung to the warmth of her presence, like a lighthouse in a storm. The bailiff called the case. Walsh versus Walsh. The words echoed in my ears. I never imagined I'd hear my family name used like a wound. Hector's lawyer was polished, silver-tongued. He painted a picture of an old woman who'd misunderstood her place, who was well cared for, loved, protected, but growing confused, forgetful. Mrs. Walsh has lived with her son and daughter-in-law rent-free for years. He said smoothly. She's had food, shelter, medical care. This is not abuse. Your Honor, this is family tension being blown out of proportion by outside influence. He glanced at Elena. She didn't blink. It continued. She's being manipulated. A video, captured out of context, is now being used to paint a son as a villain. We ask that this court dismiss the claims and recognize the care Mr. Walsh has provided. Care. I nearly laughed. But I didn't, because it was my turn. The judge asked me to take the stand. I moved slowly, my knees stiff, but I didn't let anyone help me. I stood tall, or as tall as my spine would allow, and placed my hand on the Bible. I promised to tell the truth. And then I did. I told them about the small things first. About the room in the back. About the meals I wasn't allowed to eat at the table I bought with my husband. About the long stretches of silence. About the fear. Then, I told them about the party. About the rice. About the bowl. About the moment my son looked at me, not as a mother, but as a burden. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because I was done letting my tears be the only thing I had left to offer. When I finished, the judge leaned forward. "Mrs. Walsh, why didn't you come forward sooner?" I looked down at my hands. The lines, the scars, the years, because I thought this was just how it is. I said, "For women my age, for mothers who outlive their usefulness, you shrink, you fold, you disappear quietly." I paused, but I'm not ready to disappear. Not yet. There was a silence in the room that felt heavy, not uncomfortable, just full of truth. Elena stood. She submitted evidence, property deeds, utility bills in my name, testimony from neighbors. Rosa had given a statement. So had Patty, surprisingly, quiet and unsure, but enough to confirm things weren't, as Hector had claimed. Even Miguel's drawing the house, the sun, me, smiling, was submitted as a symbol of emotional harm and family fracture. The judge took it all, listened, and when it was Hector's turn to speak, he stood slowly, no longer cocky, just tired. He tried to be measured, tried to say he'd been under stress, that he loved me, that things got out of hand, but his words fell flat, because the truth, once set free, has a weight that no performance can lift. Later that afternoon, we waited for the judge's ruling. Elena sat with me on a bench outside, watching, as clouds shifted overhead. "You were incredible," she said softly. "I didn't feel incredible," I replied. She smiled. "But you were." At 4:15, we were called back. Judge Thompson looked down at us from her bench. Her voice was even, deliberate. "After reviewing the evidence, this court finds in favor of Amelia Walsh." My heart stopped. Full ownership of the property remains with Mrs. Walsh. Furthermore, a permanent protective order is granted. Mr. Hector Walsh is to vacate the residence within 15 days. I closed my eyes, not in relief, not yet, in reverence, because something sacred had just been returned to me. My name, my place, my voice. Outside the courthouse, Hector stormed off, didn't speak, didn't turn around. Patty followed, her eyes wet, her arms crossed, like she didn't know which side of herself to hold on to. Miguel ran to me, hugged my legs. "I told my teacher you were brave," he whispered. I laughed for the first time in weeks, and it felt like breathing. That night, Rosa brought over a pie, apple, warm, crumbly. We sat in my kitchen with the windows open and the television turned low. Elena texted to say, "Congratulations." Miguel fell asleep on the couch with his drawing still clutched in his hand. And I stood by the stove, making rice, not for anyone else, just for me. He was gone. By the 14th day, I watched from the front window as the moving van pulled away. The last thing he took was the patio grill, the one he used to host his precious barbecues, symbols of power, of control. It didn't matter to him that Robert bought it years ago, back when Saturdays meant family and not social climbing. He didn't say goodbye, just slammed the door one final time. The silence afterward was different than before. It wasn't suffocating. It was clean, like the house could breathe again. But the outside world, that was another matter. Because Hector hadn't just left, he'd launched a campaign. The first Facebook post appeared 2 days after he moved out. A photo of me from years ago, apron on, standing in the kitchen, smiling, captioned with the words, "I gave my mother everything. This is how she repaid me." Then came a string of vague posts. Not everyone tells the full story. Funny how people change when a camera's rolling. Some things aren't abuse, they're just parenting in reverse. He didn't name me outright, but everyone in Willow Falls knew. He started showing up at church again, speaking up during prayer meetings, shaking hands with old friends. he'd ignored for years. He gave interviews, short ones, carefully edited to a small online magazine about the burden of caring for elderly parents and media manipulation. Patty said nothing. Miguel stayed with me more often than not. But what hurt most wasn't Hector's lies. It was the people who weren't sure what to believe. Some neighbors waved less enthusiastically. Some friends stopped calling. At the grocery store, 2 women stood by the produce and lowered their voices when I passed. It's hard, you know, dealing with older folks. Maybe it wasn't as bad as it looked. I felt it again. That old, familiar shrinking. But this time, it didn't settle in. Because the next day, something happened. Rosa knocked on my door with a box in her hands. "I think it's time you saw this," she said. Inside were letters, dozens of them, printed emails, messages, notes, all from strangers, all from people who'd seen the video. My mother went through something like this. "Thank you for speaking out. Your story gave me the courage to move my abuelita in with me. I've watched the clip 5 times. The look on your face, I'll never forget it. You are not invisible. My son pushed me once. I never told anyone. Now I think I will. Your strength reminds me of my grandmother. She passed last year. Thank you for carrying the light." I sat on the porch and read every word. Each letter was a thread in a quilt of pain and healing and solidarity. People across the country, from Milwaukee to El Paso, had seen me, not just a headline. They saw a mother, a survivor, a woman refusing to vanish. The next Sunday, I went back to church, not through the side door like before. Through the front, head held high. Some people looked away. Others looked confused. But one by one, others came. Mrs. Halloway from 3 blocks over brought me a fresh-baked lemon loaf. A young woman named Trina, whose own father had once been abusive, hugged me quietly near the choir stand. Even the pastor, usually cautious, included me in his sermon. Sometimes, the right thing is the quiet thing, the uncomfortable thing, the brave thing. I didn't need him to name names. I knew he meant me. A week later, the local news station reached out again. They wanted to do a follow-up, a sit-down interview. This time, with me. Elena called to ask what I wanted. Not what I was willing to do, but what I wanted. I sat in silence for a moment. Then I said, "I want them to see that we don't disappear." So I did it. I wore my Sunday dress, fixed my hair, and sat under bright studio lights. I told my story, from the beginning. Not just the fall, not just the push, but the years before the slow erasure, the growing silence, the shame I mistook for duty. And then I told them what happened next, how the video changed things. Yes, but also how people like Rosa and Elena helped me remember who I was. How my grandson reminded me I still had something worth standing for. And when the reporter asked what I would say to other women in my shoes, I said, "Don't wait for the world to see you. Show yourself. Your story has value, even if the ones closest to you pretend it doesn't." That interview aired on a Friday night. By Saturday morning, Rosa told me the town had shifted. The comments were full of support. A local elder care center invited me to speak. An anonymous donor sent money to help fix up the old guest room. And Hector, well, his words faded, like echoes without walls, because in the end, no amount of spin could undo what the town had seen. And what I had finally said out loud. That evening, Miguel crawled into my lap with a book. He didn't ask about his father. He didn't ask about the video. He just asked me to read. And I did. Not just because he needed the story, but because I was finally ready to speak. It started with tea, just 1 cup. Rosa came over one chilly Tuesday afternoon, her coat still dusted with the remnants of autumn leaves. She carried a box of cinnamon biscuits and a small, hopeful smile. "I brought extra," she said, "in case someone else shows up." I laughed, not because I expected anyone, but because the idea felt nice. We sat at the kitchen table, the very table Hector once refused to let me use when company came over, and shared silence. Stories, warmth. By the end of that week, there were 3 chairs filled. Mrs. Herrera from across the street, Mr. Langston from down the block, who'd just lost his wife after 42 years, and Nora, a soft-spoken woman with silver curls and shy hands who confessed in a whisper that her daughter hadn't called in 6 months. We didn't talk about pain. Not at first. We talked about gardens, about old recipes, about the weather and the newspaper, and how nothing on television made sense anymore. But underneath it all was the same quiet thread. I thought I was the only one. By the 3rd week, there were 6 of us. I started baking again, not just for Miguel, but for them, for us. I'd forgotten how good it felt to feed people who smiled when they tasted something you made with love. And slowly, this house, my house, began to change. No longer a place of isolation, but one of gathering. Word spread. At the grocery store, the cashier whispered, "Is it true you have people over just to talk?" The postman asked if he could bring his mother next week. Even the young man who cleaned the church parking lot left a note in my mailbox. My grandma passed before I could ask her anything. Could I come just to listen? I said yes, to all of them, because I knew what it meant to feel unseen. And I wasn't going to let anyone carry that weight alone anymore. Elena came by one evening, just after one of our gatherings had wrapped up. There were still teacups on the table, crumbs of peach cobbler on mismatched plates. She looked around at the laughter that still lingered in the walls, at the folded blankets, the tiny thank you notes pinned to the fridge, and smiled. "You started a movement," she said. I shook my head. "I just opened my door." She sat across from me. "That's more than most people do." We talked until the sun dipped behind the trees. About legacy, about loneliness, about what comes after surviving. And she said something I'll never forget. "You didn't just win your house back. You rebuilt your place in the world." One night, Patty came by, unannounced. It had been weeks since I'd seen her since the court ruling. Since Hector vanished into whatever version of life he was trying to piece together. She stood on the porch, holding a small pot of tulips. "They're for the front steps," she said softly. Miguel said flowers make the house look alive. I took the pot, held it gently. Then I looked at her. She wasn't the same. Her eyes were softer, older, maybe, tired in a way I understood. I didn't know how bad it had gotten. She said, "I should have done more. I was afraid." I nodded. "Not in forgiveness. Not yet. But in understanding? You're welcome to sit at the table." I told her, "If you're ready." She blinked back tears. And that Sunday, she came. She sat beside Mrs. Herrera, helped Mr. Langston butter his cornbread, and even shared a memory of Hector when he was kind, before the pressure, before the anger. And for a brief moment, I saw the woman I once hoped she'd become. Maybe she was still in there. The table grew fuller. We added chairs, brought out the old folding ones from the garage. Sometimes people brought their kids, their grandkids. Sometimes they brought nothing but silence. And still they were welcome, because this wasn't just about being heard. It was about healing. And healing isn't loud. It doesn't shout its progress. It moves slowly, steadily, like steam rising from a teacup, like laughter returning to a house that had forgotten how to echo. One evening, Miguel asked if we could give the group a name, a real one. He insisted, so people know where they're going. I asked what he had in mind. He grinned. Grandma's table. I smiled. Simple, true, perfect. Now, each Wednesday afternoon, the front porch fills with footsteps. The kettle whistles. The chairs creak. The voices rise and fall like a hymn. We don't fix everything. We don't try to. But we see each other. And sometimes, that's enough. Because in a world that tries to make the old invisible, we're carving out space. A warm, well-worn space where stories are honored, where silence is broken, and where no one, no matter how many years they've carried alone, is ever turned away. It was almost winter again, the kind of cold that creeps in through the window frames. No matter how many towels you've pressed against the cracks, Rosa had just brought over a new quilt she'd sewn herself warm. Patchwork, heavy in the comforting way. I had just poured tea when I heard the knock. Not the usual tap-tap of a neighbor or visitor from Grandma's table. This one was heavier, slower, like someone unsure if they should be knocking at all. I opened the door, and there he was. Hector, my son, thinner than I remembered. His hair had grown in uneven patches of gray. He wore a coat too big for his frame, collar upturned, hands shoved in his pockets like a child waiting for punishment. He didn't smile, didn't speak, just stood there, staring at the porch he used to treat like a throne. I didn't speak either. Not at first. My fingers clenched the edge of the door, not out of fear, but to keep from reaching for him. It's strange, what the body remembers, even after the heart forgets. Finally, he spoke. I don't want to fight. I raised an eyebrow. That was the one thing I hadn't expected him to say. He looked past me, toward the living room, where the fireplace crackled, and Miguel's dinosaur sat on the rug. I've been thinking about what I did, about how I spoke to you, what I took. He swallowed. I didn't come to make it right. I know I can't. But I thought maybe you'd let me say it. I stepped aside. Just a little, just enough. He entered like a man walking into a memory slowly, carefully, brushing the air with his fingertips. He didn't sit. He looked around, at the photos on the wall, at the new curtains, at the empty teacups. You made it feel like home again, he said, barely above a whisper. It always was home. I replied, you just stopped treating it like one. He nodded, took a deep breath. After the ruling, I left, tried to start over, moved in with a friend from college, took a job 2 towns over. Patty and I were still figuring things out. He paused, but none of it made sense. I kept thinking about what Miguel said, about how you made the house feel happy. End quote. He looked up at me then. I don't think I ever said thank you. Not once. For everything. The air between us trembled. Years of resentment, of silence, of things left unsaid. He pulled something from his coat pocket, a folded envelope. This is the deed, the official one. I signed the final paperwork. It's all yours. No loopholes. No ties. He placed it on the table, didn't try to hand it to me, didn't make it dramatic, just offered. Then he turned toward the door. I'll go. I had to say it. Before the year ends, before you think I forgot. I watched him walk to the porch, hand on the doorknob. Then I said, the thing I didn't plan to say. You were a good boy. Once. He stopped. I know, he said, and I've been trying to find him again. I didn't call him back, didn't offer tea or demand apology, but when the door clicked shut behind him, I didn't lock it. That night, I sat by the fire, the envelope still unopened on the table. Patty sent a message short, simple. Thank you for letting him come. I didn't reply, but I left the lamp on the porch, burning late into the night. Not for him, but for the part of myself I thought I'd buried, the part that still believes in second chances. Mama, Miguel said one evening, curling up beside me, as the fire crackled low. Why did you let him come back? His voice was soft, honest, not accusatory, just curious in that way. Only children can be curious enough to touch the truth without fearing it. I paused, folding the blanket over his knees. Do you mean Hector? He nodded. He hurt you. I saw it. He made you cry. The words, spoken so plainly, landed heavier than any shout. I looked at him, this small, wide-eyed boy who'd seen too much, too soon, and realized it was time. Time to share something I had never spoken out loud. Not to Rosa, not to Elena, not even to Robert when he was still alive. Come with me, I said, standing slowly. We walked down the hall, past the photos, past the empty guest room that used to be mine, into the linen closet, where a small wooden box sat on the top shelf, just beneath an old quilt. I took it down, blew off the dust. Inside was a folded apron, worn, faded, but neatly pressed, white cotton, with a tiny row of hand-stitched blue flowers along the edge. Miguel reached out, gently brushing the embroidery. Did you make this? I nodded. When I was 16, for my mother, I told him the story slowly, sitting at the kitchen table while the kettle whistled behind us. My mother, Anna, was a housekeeper most of her life. She cleaned rooms at a motel just off the highway, the kind with flickering neon signs and rust in the sinks. She raised me on her own. My father left before I could speak his name. We didn't have much, but she had rules, and one of them was simple. We work for what we keep. We care for who we love. When I turned 16, I saved for weeks to buy a small piece of fabric soft Sturdy. Nothing fancy. I stitched her favorite flowers along the hem. She cried when I gave it to her. Said it was too nice to wear while scrubbing someone else's toilet, so she hung it in the kitchen. A symbol. Of what? Grandma, Miguel asked. I smiled. Of being seen. Of being worth effort. Years later, after she passed, I found the apron still hanging in the same spot. Clean. Unused. Preserved like a prayer. I brought it home. Hung it in my own kitchen. But I never used it either. Until the day Hector raised his voice so loud, I dropped the soup pot and it shattered across the tile. That night, I found the apron in the back of a drawer. I wore it while I cleaned up. Not to protect my clothes, but to protect myself. To remember, to reclaim. And you kept it all this time, Miguel whispered. I nodded. Because no one can take your dignity unless you let them, not even family. He was quiet for a long time after that. Then he said something I didn't expect. I think Dad wants to be better, but maybe he doesn't know how. I looked at him. At the curve of his cheek, the gentle slump of his shoulders. So much of Robert lived in this boy. His patience, his honesty. Maybe, I said, but wanting to be better isn't enough. You have to show up. You have to stay. Miguel leaned his head against my arm. You stayed. And there it was. The reason I'd let Hector return. Not because he deserved it, but because Miguel did. Because the next generation needed to see that pain can be transformed, not forgotten, not excused, but used to build something stronger. A legacy, not of silence, but of resilience. That night, I pinned the apron on the kitchen wall, not behind a door, not tucked in a drawer, but front and center, where it belonged. Because some stories shouldn't be folded away. They should be passed down, stitch by stitch. It came in the form of a letter, a thick envelope, hand-delivered by a woman in a navy pantsuit who looked too young to wear such serious shoes. She introduced herself as Camille, from the Heartstone Foundation, a nonprofit that worked with elders, veterans, and community healing initiatives. She had a soft smile and a voice that sounded like public radio. I've been following your story, she said. The video, the court case, but more than that, the way you turned your house into a space of warmth, connection, and strength. It's powerful. I didn't know what to say to that. I wasn't trying to be powerful. I was trying to stay alive. She continued. We'd like to help you expand Grandma's table. Give it a permanent home. A proper one. With a kitchen 3 times the size, a reading room, a garden, space for events, workshops, counseling. She laid out brochures, mock-up designs, a map of an old building. The foundation had access to an unused schoolhouse near downtown Springfield. We'd renovate it. You'd lead it. Then came the part that pulled the rug from under me, but it would mean relocating, selling this house, or transferring it, so you could live on-site or nearby, full-time. I stared at her, at the house behind me, at the porch where I'd sat and cried, at the kitchen where I'd stitched myself back together, at the hallway where Miguel first asked if the house was mine. Leave. Could I? Should I? That night, I sat with Rosa on the porch, both of us wrapped in fleece throws, mugs of tea steaming in the cool evening air. I told her everything. She listened the way only old friends know how, with her whole body. Every nod and silence, shaped by years of shared history. When I finished, I whispered, I'm not sure I can start over again. Rosa reached over and placed her hand on mine. You're not starting over. You're planting further. The next morning, I walked from room to room. I touched the walls, the windows, the creaky floorboard by the hallway closet. Every mark told a story. Robert's muddy boots, Hector's science project stains, Miguel's crayon constellation drawn on the underside of the coffee table. This house wasn't just walls. It was witness. To joy, to loss, to survival. But maybe it had done its part. Maybe now it was time for me to witness others. I gathered the group at Grandma's table that Wednesday. 17 chairs filled the living room and spilled into the kitchen. Rosa brought orange rolls. Mr. Langston brought a poem he'd written. Miguel passed around paper cups of cider. And when it was quiet, I told them about the letter, the offer, the opportunity. I expected shock, hesitation. But what I got was something else. Applause, tears. A voice from the back, soft, wobbly, said, "I'd follow you anywhere." That night, I sat at the table long after everyone had left. Only the hum of the refrigerator kept me company. The house, once filled with so much noise and fear, now held a gentle kind of quiet. Not emptiness, just readiness. Like it, too, I knew the time had come. I looked at the framed photo of my mother, Apron, stern eyes, a hint of pride. I smiled. "We're still working for what we keep, Mama." The next day, I called Camille and said yes. It was the kind of morning that made the wind feel like memory. The last Saturday before I would leave, boxes lined the hallway, books, framed pictures. The tin recipe box passed down from my mother. Rosa had wrapped all the teacups in newspaper. Miguel labeled every box with a thick marker, adding little smiley faces to each one, like punctuation marks on the end of a sentence. I kept the kettle on all day, because people kept coming, one by one. They trickled in: neighbors, old friends, church ladies, the grocery clerk, who once whispered, "Thank you," when no one was watching. They didn't bring gifts. They brought stories. I remember the first time you brought cobbler to the potluck. You told me I wasn't invisible. My dad never talked to anyone, but he talked here. Some sat on the floor when chairs ran out. Some stood in the kitchen. Some wandered into the backyard and just stared at the garden that bloomed again after years of neglect. Miguel ran around offering cookies. Even Patty came keener now, but softer. She helped refill the lemonade pitcher. She even offered a toast to Amelia for making this house bigger than bricks. I smiled, nodded, swallowed the lump in my throat. But the real moment didn't come until the very end. As the sun began to dip behind the trees, and the last goodbyes lingered on the porch, I stepped outside for air. The street was quiet again. I thought the day was done, until I saw it. At the end of the driveway, a small crowd of people standing, holding something. Quilts, not store-bought, handmade, one by one. They walked toward me, from across town, from neighboring cities, from different churches, groups, neighborhoods, people I'd never even met, but who had heard about Grandma's table. Each one carried a quilt square, each square stitched with a message, a name, a blessing, for the days you held others when no one else did, for the meals you made with hands that had trembled, for reminding me I was still worth gathering. They lined the walkway, one by one. They sewed the pieces together right there, in front of the house, into a giant, imperfect, glorious quilt that stretched from the mailbox to the front steps. It shimmered in the golden light, colors of all kinds, threads from different hands. Tears hit my cheeks before I could stop them. I sank to the porch, holding my chest, not from pain, but from overwhelming grace. Rosa came and sat beside me, said nothing, just wrapped an arm around my shoulders and rested her head gently against mine. And someone I still don't know, who quietly whispered, "The house may change, but you will always be home." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the window, watched the wind lift the edges of the quilt like sails, ready to carry me somewhere new. I wasn't afraid. Not anymore, because I wasn't leaving something behind. I was taking it with me. Every story, every chair, every voice that once thought it didn't matter. I was carrying it forward, to a place with no corners, just tables. The building was old, brick, wide, with tall windows and creaky floors that spoke with every step, not unlike the bones in my knees on cold mornings. It used to be a schoolhouse, the kind where bells hung above doors and chalk dust clung to everything. But now, it was home, a new kind. They called it the Willow Center, but everyone knew the heart of it wasn't in the name. It was in the table. Long, handmade by a group of local woodworkers who had followed the story online. The legs were carved from reclaimed oak. The surface was smooth, with knots and nicks that told their own story, and in the center, carefully burned into the wood, was the phrase, "Everyone deserves a place." It was more than a slogan. It was a mission. The first day we opened, I expected a small turnout, maybe a dozen. Instead, the parking lot filled before noon. A woman from Indiana drove 4 hours with her father, who hadn't spoken much in years but said, "I want to sit where the lady from the video sits." A group of veterans came together in a bus. They brought coffee, and stories, and silence too, the heavy kind. But the kind that eventually breaks. Teenagers came too. At first, to volunteer for school credit. Then, just because, one boy, no older than 16, asked if he could learn to bake like someone who means it. I showed him the cobbler recipe, watched him cry when he tasted his first bite. But not everything was easy. Some days, the place felt too big. The echo in the halls reminded me of what I'd left behind, the creak of the floorboard in the old hallway, the wind tapping against the screen door, the hum of Rosa's laugh in the backyard. I missed it all. I missed Rosa. I missed Miguel's footsteps on my porch. I missed the old stove that hissed and sputtered, but still made perfect rice. There were nights I sat in my new room, staring at the wall, wondering if I'd made a mistake. But then, the stories started coming in. They came in little pieces. Notes slipped into the community bulletin board, letters taped to the doors, voicemails left after hours. I brought my mother today. She hasn't smiled since Dad died. She laughed in your kitchen. I didn't think anyone would remember my birthday. Someone here did. Thank you for letting me serve food instead of just receiving it. I felt human again. One day, I walked into the main room and saw a new table in the corner, a round one, surrounded by mismatched chairs, all painted by hand. Someone had hung a sign above it. "This is for those who need to be found." I didn't know who put it there, but it stayed. And every week, someone sat there, a newcomer, a wanderer, a soul trying to find their voice. Every week, someone was found. Camille came by one afternoon to check in. She looked around the room at the bustling kitchen, the crafts spread across tables, the laughter echoing down the hall. "You've created something sacred here," she said. I shook my head. "I didn't create it. I just made room for it." She smiled. "Same thing." One evening, as I swept the hallway, I heard footsteps behind me. Small ones. Familiar. Mama. Miguel. He ran down the corridor, arms wide, backpack bouncing. Patty followed, slower, but smiling. We thought we'd come for the weekend. He missed the rolls. I laughed. We sat together that night at the big table. He helped me knead dough. We sang old songs. He told me about school, about new friends, about how he was learning to stand up for the quiet kids. And then he said, "I told my teacher, you're a hero." I smiled, shook my head. "No, baby, I'm just a woman with a kettle and an open door." But inside, something settled, because maybe that was enough. That night, I wrote a note and pinned it to the kitchen door. It read, "If you came here to be seen, welcome. If you came here to be quiet, stay. If you came here to find your place, you already have. The table is set. The kettle is on. And you matter." The fire alarm screamed at 2 Enralk, 17-inch the morning. I sat up in bed, heart pounding so fast I thought it might burst before my feet hit the floor. The hallway outside my room was already full of smoke, thin but spreading fast. Not thick black smoke, no flames visible yet, but the unmistakable smell of burnt plastic and heat rising from somewhere near the back kitchen. I grabbed my coat, my shoes, and the small tin box where I kept the letters. The rest I could lose. Outside, flashing red lights painted the front lawn. Camille was already there, her phone pressed to her ear, eyes darting between firefighters and staff. Someone had already pulled the alarm. Everyone got out. No one was hurt. But the damage, the kitchen was gone. The stove, the cabinets, the murals the volunteers had painted, even the handmade shelf where we stored our favorite mugs, all blackened and warped, drowning under water and soot. By sunrise, the Willow Center smelled like a memory charred too soon. The investigation was swift. Accidental electrical fire, old wiring behind one of the walls, hidden for decades, finally gave out. There was no fault, no negligence, just bad luck. But even knowing that didn't stop the ache. For 3 days, I wandered the building in silence. The rooms were intact, but the air had changed. People came to help sweeping, taping plastic over windows, scrubbing what they could. But the laughter was quieter, the energy dimmed. Even I felt it. For the first time in months, I found myself asking, was this too much? Had I flown too close to something I wasn't meant to build? Had I made the mistake of believing the table could survive outside my little house? Then, on the fourth day, Rosa showed up. I didn't know she was coming. I just turned around in the hallway, and there she was, arms full of fabric, quilt squares, burnt orange, soft gray, deep blue. She handed them to me. "We start again," she said. Behind her stood Miguel, Patty, even Hector. He held a box of tools, said nothing, just nodded. One by one, others arrived. Langston with plywood, Trina with measuring tape, teenagers with paint cans, veterans with folding tables, and Camille, holding her clipboard but letting it hang at her side, eyes shining. "You made us a table," she said. "Now let us build the kitchen." We moved fast, not because we had to, because we wanted to, because something in us had survived the smoke, and it was hungry to live. We painted the walls, new colors. We brought in secondhand stoves, donations from local restaurants, even a new fridge that still had the store tag dangling from the side. People brought pots, pans, spoons, cutting boards, each one with a note, a prayer, a name etched underneath. And when the new mural went up, the one the kids designed, it wasn't just pictures of food or hands holding each other. It was a flame, gentle, controlled, sacred, with a single word underneath, rise. The reopening wasn't grand. It was quiet. It was right. One by one, the chairs were filled again. This time, not with survivors, but with builders. Not just guests, but family. That night, as we lit the stove for the first meal in the new kitchen, Miguel leaned against me. "Did you ever think it would burn down?" I thought for a moment. "Everything burns. Baby," I said softly. "But some things are strong enough to rise after." He nodded, then smiled. We made fire our friend, and from that day on, the Willow Center never closed again. Sometimes, late at night, when the building has gone quiet and the tea kettle has cooled on the stove, I walk the halls of the Willow Center in my slippers. I pass the community room, where Mrs. Langston now teaches a painting class on Tuesdays. I check the bookshelf in the corner, where Miguel's picture book sits, his very own creation, published with the help of a librarian who heard his story and said, "This deserves pages." I walk past the row of hooks where visitors hang their coats and pause at the corkboard covered in notes. "Thank you for listening. You reminded me I'm not invisible. This place saved my life." I read them all, even though I've memorized every word. And when I reach the kitchen, I do what I've done since the first day we reopened. I turn on the porch light, not because someone is coming, but because someone might. Because there was a time I needed a porch light. There was a time I thought no one would see me again. I used to believe the biggest loss in life was time, the days that slip past you, the years that fold in on themselves like worn pages. But it's not. The greatest loss is forgetting your worth. The slow unraveling of self when no one calls your name, when you're only spoken about, never to. When your presence becomes an afterthought. I nearly disappeared in that silence. And yet here I am. When people ask me what I learned through all of this, I tell them the truth. I didn't learn strength. I remembered it. I didn't become brave. I just stopped waiting for permission to be seen. I stopped believing that surviving was the end of the road. Now, I build tables. I pour tea. I listen. Sometimes, that's all people need. Sometimes, it's all we can give. And it's enough. Miguel is taller now, his voice deeper, his laughter still golden. He helps in the kitchen when he's not at school, teaches the younger kids how to knead dough, how to be patient with recipes and people alike. The other day, I asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up. He thought for a moment, then said, "Someone who makes people feel safe." I couldn't speak for a while after that, because what greater legacy could there be? What did you feel while listening to this story all the way through? If it touched your heart, leave the number 1 inch, the comments. If you didn't feel connected to it, feel free to write 0. Every piece of feedback means a lot to me, because it's thanks to you that I can keep going. It's from your responses that I draw the energy to tell the next chapter. A new story is coming. Even deeper, even more moving. and I truly hope you'll be there to listen with me.